Have you ever heard any teacher telling the students, attendance is not compulsory in my class? Since about 1980, that is 2 years after I started teaching in college. Every year, as I stood before a new batch of college students, I would begin with a statement that completely shocked them. I would say, attendance is not compulsory in my class. Before they could recover from the surprise, I would continue. You don't have to remain silent. You don't even have to be disciplined. If you feel like playing a prank, that's perfectly fine. In fact, if you need ideas for a prank, I'll happily suggest a few. Now the students would begin looking at one another. Surely this professor is joking, they would think. But I wouldn't finish at that. I would add, you don't have to keep looking into your textbooks while I'm teaching. If you feel like playing a game instead, I don't mind. At that point, almost every face in the classroom wore the same expression. Complete confusion. After all, from primary school onwards, they had been taught only one thing. Be regular. Be disciplined. Be silent. Pay attention. I would allow the silence to settle for a few moments. Then I would explain. Remember one thing. I am here to teach human beings. Not to train machines. Not to turn stones into any objects. Students may not know the subject when they enter the classroom. That is why they come to learn. But students are extraordinarily good at judging something else. They know whether their teacher truly understands the subject. They know whether the teacher can guide them. They know whether the teacher deserves their attention. If my knowledge is shallow, if my teaching cannot hold your attention, if I fail to make learning meaningful, then naturally your mind will wander. You may chat. You may play games. You may think of pranks. And if that happens, I will not blame you. I will question myself first. Because it simply means I have failed to earn your attention. By the time I finished saying this, the classroom would be absolutely silent. Not because I demanded silence, but because I had earned their attention. The interesting part would come later year after year. Despite declaring that attendance was not compulsory, my classes were almost always full. Not because students feared punishment, but because they wanted to be there. The classroom was rarely dull. There was discussion. There were questions. There were moments of deep reflection. And there was plenty of laughter. No one came to ask me for ideas about pranks. Instead, students stayed back after class to ask for guidance, not only about psychology, but about life itself. Looking back today, I realize that the greatest achievement of a teacher is not completing the syllabus. It is creating a classroom where students choose to learn. Perhaps that is why even today, some of the students I taught as far back as 1978 are still in touch with me. Not because they remember every chapter that I had taught, but because they remember how I made them feel about learning. Education begins where compulsion ends. The best classrooms are not built on fear. They are built on trust, curiosity, respect, and the joy of discovering something new together. What do you think creates genuine discipline in a classroom? Strict rules or inspiring teaching? I'd love to hear your thoughts.